That third failure in a row, did you think, I need to pack this in?
Never.
Why not?
I don't ever give up. I'd have to be dead or completely incapacitated.
Really liking what you do, whatever area that you get into, given that even if you're the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing. If you don't like it, life is too short. If you like what you're doing, you think about it even when you're not working. I mean, it's something that your mind is drawn to, and if you don't like it, you just really can't make it work, I think.
So many people try to talk me out of starting a rocket company. It was crazy. One good friend of mine collected a whole series of videos of rockets blowing up and made me watch those. He just didn't want me to lose all my money. We're doing these things that seem unlikely to succeed, and we've been fortunate, and at least thus far they have succeeded.
Now is the time to take risk. You don't have kids. As you get older, your obligations increase. So and once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. You won't regret it.
How did you figure you were going to start a car company and be successful at it?
Well, I didn't really think Tesla would be successful. I thought we would most likely fail. But I thought that we at least could address the false perception that people had that an electric car had to be ugly and slow and boring like a golf cart.
But you say you didn't expect the company to be successful, then why try?
If something's important enough, you should try, even if the probable outcome is failure. You focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. For example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. I think that's the way to go. For any given company, just can keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts.
When I interview someone to work at the companies, would be to ask them to tell me about the problems that they worked on and how they solved them. And if someone was really the person that solved it, they'll be able to answer multiple levels. They'll be able to go down to the brass tacks. And if they weren't, they'll get stuck. And then you can say, oh, this person was not really the person who solved it, because anyone who struggled hard with a problem never forgets it.
If you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company.
You've got to make sure that whatever you're doing is a great product or service. It has to be really great. And I go back to what I was saying earlier, where if you're a new company, I mean, unless it's like some new industry or new market that, if it's an untapped market, then you have more ability to, the standard is lower for your product or service. But if you're entering anything where there's an existing marketplace against large entrenched competitors, then your product or service needs to be much better than theirs. It can't be a little bit better, because then you put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, and they say, why would you buy it as a consumer? You're always going to buy the trusted brand unless there's a big difference. So a lot of times, entrepreneur will come up with something which is only slightly better. And it can't just be slightly better. It's got to be a lot better.
Depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and We're so hot up, we had one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night. 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, like, I mean, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say, particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, you say like, okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company.
You are unusually fearless and willing to go in the face of other people telling you something is crazy. And I know a lot of pretty crazy people. You still stand out. Where does that come from, or how do you think about making a decision when everyone tells you this is a crazy idea? Or where do you get the internal strength to do that?
Well, first of all, I'd say I actually think I feel fear quite strongly. So it's not as though I just have the absence of fear. I feel it quite strongly. But there are just times when something is important enough, you believe in it enough, that you do it in spite of the fear.
So speaking of important things,
like people shouldn't think people shouldn't think, well, I feel fear about this and therefore I shouldn't do it. It's normal to feel fear. Like you'd have to be something mentally wrong if you didn't feel fear.
So you just feel it and let the importance of it drive you to do it anyway.
Yeah, actually, something that can be helpful is fatalism, to some degree. If you just accept the probabilities, then that diminishes fear. When starting SpaceX, I thought the odds of success were less than 10%, and I just accepted that actually probably I would just lose everything. But that maybe would make some progress if we could just move the ball forward. Even if we died, maybe some other company could pick up the baton and keep moving it forward, so that would still do some good. Same with Tesla. I thought the odds of a car company succeeding were extremely low.
Yeah. One does have to be focused on with short-term and money coming in when creating a company, because otherwise the company will die. So I think that a lot of times people think like creating a company is going to be fun. I would say it's not. It's really not that fun. I mean, there are periods of fun, and there are periods of where it's just awful. And particularly if you're the CEO of the company, you actually have a distillation of all the worst problems in the company. There's no point in spending your time on things that are going right. So you only spend your time on things that are going wrong. And there are things that are going wrong that other people can't take care of. So you have like the worst. You have a filter for the crappiest problem in the company, the most pernicious and painful problem. So I wouldn't say I think you have to feel quite compelled to do it, and have a fairly high pain threshold. And there's a friend of mine who says like starting a company is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. And there's some truth to that. The staring into the abyss part is that you're going to be constantly facing the extermination of the company. Because most startups fail. It's like 90%, arguably 99% of startups fail. So that's the staring into the abyss part. You're constantly saying, okay, if I don't get this right, the company will die. It can be quite stressful. And then the eating glass part is you've got to do the problems. You've got to work on the problems that the company needs you to work on, not the problems you want to work on. And so that's you end up working on problems that you'd really wish you weren't working on. And so that's the eating glass part. And that goes on for a long time.
So how do you keep your focus on the big picture when you're constantly faced with, we could be out of business in a month?
Well, it's just a very small percentage of mental energy is on the big picture. Like you know where you're generally heading for, and the actual path is going to be some sort of zigzaggy thing in that direction. And try not to deviate too far from the path that you want to be on, but you're going to have to do that to some degree.
But I don't want to diminish the. I mean, I think the profit motive is a good one if the rules of an industry are properly set up. So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with profit. In fact, profit just means that people are paying you more for whatever you're doing than you're spending to create it. That's a good thing. and if that's not the case, then you'll be out of business, and rightfully so. Because you're not adding enough value.
First of all, I really need to give some thought to like how can I provide advice that would be most helpful, and I'm not sure I've given enough thought to that to give you the best possible answer. But I think certainly being focused on something that you're confident will have high value to someone else, and just being really rigorous in making that assessment, because people tend to a natural human tendency is wishful thinking. So a challenge for entrepreneurs is to say, well, what's the difference between really believing in your ideals and sticking to them versus pursuing some unrealistic dream that doesn't actually have merit? And that is a really difficult thing to tell. Can you tell the difference between those two things?
Right.
You know? So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. I think certainly extremely tenacious, and then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week.
Gosh,
And
that's
then
a lot of work.
all those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve.
You're the CEO of SpaceX, and you've said that your ultimate goal is to get humankind to Mars. I've heard your response to the question, but these guys need to hear it. Why is Mars important? Why does Mars matter?
Sure. Well, I think it's really a fundamental decision we need to make as a civilization. What kind of future do we want? Do we want a future where we are forever confined to one planet until some eventual extinction event, however far in the future that might occur? Or do we want to become a multi-planet species and then ultimately be out there among the stars and be among many planets, many star systems? And I think the latter is a far more exciting and inspiring future than the former. And Mars is the next natural step. In fact, it's the only planet we really have a shot at establishing a self-sustaining city on. And I think once we do establish such a city, there will be a strong forcing function for the improvement of spaceflight technology that will then enable us to establish colonies elsewhere in the solar system and ultimately extend beyond our solar system. And so there's the defensive reason of protecting the future of humanity, ensuring that the light of consciousness is not extinguished should some calamity befall Earth. But also, and that's the defensive reason. But personally, I find what gets me more excited is the fact that this would be an incredible adventure. I mean, it'd be like the greatest adventure ever. And it would be exciting and inspiring. And there need to be things that excite and inspire people.
Yeah.
You have to be, reasons why you get up in the morning. It can't just be solving problems. It's got to be, something great's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, we talked about this at length yesterday. It's not an exit strategy or a backup plan for humankind when Earth fails.
Right.
It's also to inspire people on Earth, right, and to transcend and to go beyond our mental limits of what we think we can achieve.
Right. I mean, you think of sort of how incredible the Apollo program was, and just I mean, if you ask anyone and say, name some of humanity's greatest achievements of the 20th century, the Apollo program landing on the moon would in many, if not most places, be number one.
Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So what am I trying to say here? Work hard and you can solve any problem. There is nothing that's so scary that you can't go solve it with hard work and a little bit of knowledge and some elbow grease, etc. At SpaceX, we knew developing engines would be really hard. We didn't know we would be developing the end caps on our domes or on our tanks. It's called spin forming. It's a crazy technology. Seems really dangerous to do, but we've mastered that. We build our own heat shield tiles for the bottom of the Dragon capsule. So we knew we had to invent it. We did it. It was hard. We spent a lot of investment doing it, but we weren't afraid of trying that new thing, trying to build that new technology. We need to quit being afraid of failure. We really need to rebrand this concept of failure. And for the students, I'm not talking about that gives you permission to fail your tests. It's not the kind of failure. I'm talking about when you're trying to do something new and you're trying to innovate, you're trying to develop, you should not be afraid of failure. You should be totally willing to invest something, build something, test it, and fail it, because then you've learned. Thomas Edison, when he was developing the long life light bulb, he said he has not failed 10,000 times. He had not failed once. He had succeeded in proving that those 10,000 ways will not work. That's rebranding failure. I love that. This is the Merlin engine on our test stand in Texas. We've tweaked the design of this system hundreds of times. This is probably somewhere between the 150th and 160th version of this engine, but it's a screamer. We had a bunch of failures early on in testing. They're quite dynamic. This is the first stage test, getting tested in Central Texas as well. Learned a lot on the last vehicle, and now we're working on the new one. This is the fairing that that protects the satellite during the heating of ascent. It's giant. It's 17-foot diameter. It's about 50 feet tall. It's a living room that basically opens up to allow the satellite to be exposed to space so we can pop it off in orbit. And here's our second stage. It's so important to build and test. Even if you're afraid that it's going to fail, build and test, build and test. The final test that I'm going to show you is of our Grasshopper project. We're trying to develop the technologies to get reusability. Rockets to be reusable, like aircraft are reusable. This is so exciting. No one does this. So we're 5 for 5 testing on that Grasshopper. Yay. But that means we're not pushing hard enough. We have to tunnel one of those vehicles into the ground by trying something really hard. We haven't done that yet. So now our challenge to our test team is you gotta push hard enough that we're gonna see something happen. A spectacular video. That's a spectacular video. Failures are very spectacular.
It is easy to get somewhat blasé about a rocket factory if you're here every day. But it's true what you say. I mean, this really is a rocket factory, and you're walking around, and that's a rocket engine, and that's a stage that's going to go to orbit, and that's a spacecraft that's going to carry people to the space station, and one thing after another. And these are actually pretty remarkable things. But I have to remind myself of that from time to time, because as I walk around, all I tend to see are, oh, we got to fix that, we got to improve this, we got to change that design. So I have to sort of bring myself back, think about the big picture, and remind myself that this is actually pretty cool, unusual stuff. The reason I'm doing SpaceX is not due to some childhood epiphany or because I think this is the highest return on investment way to spend money. I think starting a rocket company is an unusual thing to do and pretty risky. But I'm a big believer in us becoming a space-sparing civilization and ultimately extending life beyond Earth. When I was in college, I tried to think, what are the really big problems that face the world, that which will most affect the future of humanity? And the three that I thought were the most important were the internet, transition to a sustainable energy economy, and the third was space exploration, in particular, making life multiplanetary. And I didn't really think I'd have anything to do with the third one because that seemed like the province of governments, largely or entirely. I wasn't sure how I could get involved in sustainable energy. Although that was the path that I originally started on. That's what originally brought me to Silicon Valley, was to do a PhD at Stanford in energy storage technologies for electric vehicles. I taught myself how to program computers when I was a kid, and bought my first computer when I was 10 and sold my first commercial program when I was 12. Not bad. Yeah. made a lot of money for a little kid, and so it seemed like there must be room for innovation, and that's how I decided to do something in the financial services arena, even though I really had essentially almost no background in financial services, except for an internship at a bank. Anyway, so then PayPal went public. We sold PayPal to eBay for about $1.5 billion, and then I wanted to do something different, something outside of the internet arena. I was a little burnt out on the internet, having been immersed in it and spending it, every day of my life on it for a long time, and that's where I thought, well, I've got a bit of capital. Let me see if I can do something in the space arena. And I initially started out with this idea of, let me do a small philanthropic mission that will generate public interest. And so I gathered some engineers from the space business and started to learn more and more about what it took to do space missions. But I came to the conclusion that really the reason why we weren't making more advancements in space was not that there wasn't enough public will. I think there's actually plenty of public will for space exploration, particularly in the United States, which is a nation of explorers. But I came to the conclusion that really there was a fundamental problem with space transportation. And if the space transportation costs hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, and people don't think there's a way of doing it that doesn't bankrupt us, they're not going to want to do it. So we got to figure out a way to do it that's affordable and workable and reliable. That's why I started SpaceX, is really to try to make a huge difference, at least an order of magnitude or more difference in the cost of space transportation, and in the magnitude of the capability of space transportation, because we need very big rockets if we're going to make life multiplanetary. Well, definitely the long-term vision is to help make life multiplanetary. So really, these are all steps along the way to doing that. So we start off with a small rocket. It's capable of putting half-ton satellites into orbit. We're about to do our third launch, which will carry an Air Force satellite and 2 small NASA satellites in about a month. And then we've got our big rocket under development, the Falcon 9, which will actually be the most capable rocket in the world, or at least the Falcon 9 Heavy, which is a larger variant of it with 2 side boosters, will be the most capable rocket in the world. And we also have our Dragon spacecraft. And then a couple of years ago, we won the contract to design, build, and operate the successor to the Space Shuttle, which retires in 2010. So we will be taking supplies to the space station, returning them to Earth, and then NASA has an option to add manned capability to our system. To pay us to transport astronauts as well, which we think they will exercise. And we were actually designing the whole system with people in mind from the beginning. So it's a relatively small difference from one to the next.
And to most people, I mean, we come in here, we look at this, we're thinking NASA. So compare the NASA approach to your approach at SpaceX. Compare and contrast that a little for me so we see the difference.
Sure. Well, it's important to appreciate that the actual hardware construction is done by semi-private companies. I mean, Boeing and Lockheed are the 2 biggest contractors to NASA. So when you see a rocket getting launched, that's either a Boeing or a Lockheed rocket typically. NASA does not build the rockets, but NASA will contract with the big aerospace companies, the big government contractors to develop and build these rockets. And that's typically done in a cost-plus manner, where there's just a fixed fee, or there's a fee or a total contract value, and then Boeing and Lockheed will earn a fee that is a percentage of that contract value. And if that cost increases, then they earn more. So it's not a very good incentive scheme because they're incented to make it more costly. And that's one of the problems that plagues the cost of space exploration. One of the big differences we're aiming for here is full reusability. No one has ever developed a fully reusable orbital transportation system. That will be a really, really big breakthrough if we can do it. It's a very tough problem. The Soviet Union tried to solve it. The United States government tried to solve it, and spent tens of billions of dollars collectively trying to do that, and did not succeed. So it's a tough problem. We're going to try to do it though, with Falcon 9.
Okay, so what's your plan if we go out 2, 4, 6, 8 years? What's going to happen like next year or the year after? What are the benchmarks you're trying to achieve here at SpaceX?
Well, we
are launching Falcon 1. We are going to be launching Falcon 9 sometime next year. We expect to have the rocket at Cape Canaveral around the end of the year and launch sometime next year. And that'll carry both heavy satellites of over 10 tons to orbit, as well as transport our Dragon spacecraft, deliver that to orbit so it can go to the space station and do resupply. So 2 years from now, we expect to have launched our big rocket and demonstrated resupply to the space station. 4 years from now, I think we will demonstrate manned transport. And 6 years from now, I think we'll have our heavy lift launch vehicle operating. When are we going to Mars?
Are you going to Mars?
There's a lot of variability around that prediction.
But is that sort of in the back of your mind somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me just a little bit about why you want to do that.
Well, first of all, it's not that I personally want to go to Mars. It's just that, as I said, I think it's extremely important that life become multiplanetary. And so you might say, well, why do I think it's important? Aren't there lots of important things going on Earth that should be addressed? And certainly there are. And it's not, I don't mean that it's important to the exclusion of all other things, just that it makes sense to spend a small amount of our resources on doing this. And the reason it's important is if you go to the nature of importance itself. How do you decide that anything is important? Well, the lens of history is a good way to filter more versus less important things. And as you zoom out further and further, the really important stuff stays and the less important stuff goes away. And now let's say you zoom out really far and look at the entire history of Earth, or history of life itself. What are the most important elements in the history of life itself? Forget about the parochial concerns of humanity. What would any intelligent species say? Oh, those were really important items. Well, there's obviously single-celled life, multicellular life, plants and animals. The animals, things going out of the ocean onto land. The advent of mammals, consciousness. There's about maybe 10 or so big ones on that list. And on that list will also fit the extension of life to multiple planets for the first time. It would be at least as important as life going from the oceans to land, and arguably more important because life could go gradually from the oceans to land, and if it's got a little uncomfortable on the beach, you could hop back in the ocean. But extending life to another planet is a huge quantum leap. You have to go hundreds of millions of miles across an extremely hostile environment to a planet which is completely unlike anything you've evolved to live on. That's just really an extremely difficult problem. In fact, I think it's an impossible problem without the advent of consciousness. So consciousness is a necessary precursor for that.
It's almost like part of a grand design. Do you think there is some kind of destiny involved in this, or is it just physics?
Well, do I think that there's some sort of master intelligence architecting all of this stuff? I think probably not, because then you have to say, where did the master intelligence come from? So it sort of begs the question of, So I think really you can explain this with the fundamental laws of physics. It's a complex phenomenon from simple elements.